Sir, you can start after once the meeting is live, okay?
Okay, okay, okay.
Yes, sir. You may start, please.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Dinesh Deore, Assistant Professor in English. I work at PG Department of GT Patil College, Nandurbar, Maharashtra. I feel very pleased and happy that I am being invited from JK Shah Adarsh Arts College as an expert for expert talk. And my dear friends, today I am going to talk with you regarding a very wonderful topic, which is what we can say the soul of English literature, that is English novel, its emergence. So friends, first of all, I will share my screen. It's being opened. Okay. Is it visible properly? English sir, please inform me.
Sir, it is not yet open.
Okay, okay, it will, it will. Got it? Got it, sir?
Sir, before sharing that screen, you open that on your desktop and then you share, sir.
Okay, okay, okay. I will try it. I hope it is visible right now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now
Okay,
visible,
thank you.
sir.
I'm very sorry for being this technical glitch. So friends, I will discuss with you a very wonderful topic, that is novel as a literary genre. As you know very well, we consider generally there are three major genres of English literature, and we started from poetry, then we had drama, and then novel. As per their age, we consider novel as the youngest form of literature, and today we are going to discuss in details in various angles. Generally, poetry started from the time of Aristotle, Plato, and Horace and Longinus. And then drama started almost around 11th century. And novel started almost in the opening of 18th century. Officially, novel started in the first decade of the 18th century, we generally considered. Now, what we are going to learn in today's session, dear friends, today we are going to discuss novel as a literary genre. Again, we will discuss what are the reasons behind the emergence of novel genre. Obviously, novel is not all sudden emergence on the scene of literature. Then we will discuss various definitions of novel and we will try to see what exactly novel is. Apart from that, we will discuss there are various aspects of novel and we will discuss all the aspects of novel. So it will help us while reading a novel and that will help at the last to understand the novel in a better way. We are also going to discuss the types of novels, in short, journeys of the genre. Dear friends, here we will discuss various reasons behind the emergence of novel genre. As I have stated earlier, the emergence of novel was not all sudden on the scene of literature. When we start discussing the reasons behind the emergence of novel genre, then naturally we discuss the reasons behind the emergence as well as why it happened exactly in the first decade of the 18th century and why not elsewhere. Again, we can say when we had in literature, poetry and drama, those who were functioning well, what was the need to start a new literary genre? First question. And second question could be why it was only in the 18th century and why not it elsewhere? So when we start discussing the answers of these two questions, then automatically we are going to see the reasons behind the emergence of novel as a literary genre. The first reason we can say the social environment, and in short we can say the rise of the middle classes. Dear friends, change is the law of nature and that exactly changes happen in the British society. Till the beginning of 18th century, the British society was labeled by the name of only upper class. There was no place for middle class in the British society. But as you know very well, the 17th century witnessed the industrial revolution in Britain and in Europe at large. So due to that industrial revolution, many middle class families got chance to have business. And because of that changes, we can see middle class slowly and steadily got the center position of society. Earlier, there was no consideration for middle class. And as we know very well that literature is the representation of the society. So whatever the class is considered as the prominent, the same representation we can got through the literature. Earlier, middle class was not there. So there was no presentation of middle class. One thing, you can see, you can take into consideration any poetry, any drama of Shakespeare, where we hardly find any place for a common man or middle class. All Shakespearean plays almost full of details that focused on upper class, either kings, queens, or the leader of warriors. There was no place for middle class. Why? Because middle class was not at the center of British society. So that happened for the first time in the 18th century due to the industrial revolution, that middle classes also started taking the position of center. And that's why there was a need of literature that can truly represent middle class, because poetry and drama, both literary forms, were for only upper class. And there was no ready literature that can represent middle class, that can represent common man. And that's why there was a need of a new literary genre, and that new literary genre came into the form of English novel. So we can consider the beginning of 18th century witnessed the beginning of middle class coming at the center position, and somehow that matters. The novel as a new literary genre became the mouthpiece or became the form of representation for the middle class. And that's why even though we had poetry and drama on the scene of literature, there was a need of novel that can represent the middle class. The second one we can consider the democratic movement. till the end of 16th and 17th century, there was no democratic movements, and everything was controlled by either the religious institutes like church, and that somehow church control the power of kings. But in the 18th century, there was ascendancy of that feudalism, and we can consider the beginning of democratic movement. That democratic movement again underlined the importance of common people, and that's why the common people slowly taking the position of center, and that's why for the first time it was given the importance to the common people, middle classes, or the people at large. Apart from that, the ascendancy or rise of realism. The common man who was neglected by literature, now who came into the central position and who believed in realism, because common man lives a life of reality. When we read a novel of, when we read a drama of William Shakespeare, there are many elements which are far from realism. There are ghosts, there are witches. Got the point? There are extraordinary superheroes, which was not the part of 18th century society. Got the point? So literature before 18th century was far away from reality or realism. Now take the poems of earlier literature, which was again far far away from reality, and novel took that care, and it completely focused on common man, which we can consider preferred reality, because superheroes was not the part of society. Ghosts, witches were not the part of reality, were not the part of daily life, and that's why people preferred to read literature which focused on reality. Got it? So novel was the form of literature that completely focused on reality, and that's why people preferred literature which shows the reality of their own life, presentation of middle class, and that's why people kept away, or they neglected poetry or drama which were not the part of their lives. We can consider decline of drama as somehow the reasons behind the emergence of novel genre. How exactly? Now see, literature performs at two levels. First, people consider literature as a source of entertainment, and apart from that, literature also has capacity to teach the people how to live life. On these nerves, we can consider drama during Shakespearean period was at the height, it was on the peak, but there are some incidences happened, and because of that people did not prefer to go theater and watch drama. Now licensing act, I must mention here, and that is what the main cause for the decline of drama. Licensing act was passed in 1737, if I'm not wrong. And what happened due to that licensing act? That licensing act simply cut the very soul of drama. Now the king, or the censor board, in the modern terms we can consider, as we have censor board for movies, which check the content of the movie first, and then it allows whether it is okay for release or not, whether it grant permission or whether it refuse the permission. That is what the right, ultimate right of censor board. The same censor board was applied by the king in the form of licensing act. The licensing act decide whether the drama was ready to release or not. So we can consider the licensing act simply cut out the political satire. The licensing act simply cut out the religious content, or it checked whether the content is dangerous for the king and its position. If they find something objectionable, they simply cut it down. And because of that, there was nothing in terms of satire that can be presented in theaters. and that's why people found drama as a very less interested form of literature, and people needed some another form that can entertain people choices. And exactly, novel took the position of drama. As drama declined, there was what we can say the emergence of novel. The vacuum of drama filled out by a novel. Fifth reason we can consider, much had already been done. As I mentioned earlier, novel was not all sudden activity on literature or in literature. There was many write-up had already been done by the writers. Generally, novel is in prose form, but we have many novels like Gulliver Travels, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver Travels. We had Afraben's Orunoko, or we have prose type of essays by Addison and Steele published in Spectators. So that was what we can say the soil of novel was ready by these earlier writers, and this the novelist only the novelist only opened the form of novel, but the already much had already been done by the earlier writers. The sixth reason we can consider, the novel gave more freedom to the writer than the drama. Obviously, even not only to the writer but to the spectators and readers in terms we can compare. The novel gave more freedom. For writing a drama, you must have certain knowledge of writing a drama, or in terms of poetry, we must have a technical knowledge while composing a poem. But in terms of novel, it gives free hand to the writers to write. One thing. Another thing, in terms of spectators or readers, reading a novel is much more comfortable, pleasurable, and we can say it allows readers to go anywhere to read it, or to read at their own time. But in terms of watching a drama in theater, it restricts the freedom of the spectators. Spectators or audience have to be there in theater at that particular time, then only they can enjoy the drama. As compared to novel, this kind of restraints there is not. People find novel reading more comfortable. Again, in terms of drama, audience have to travel from one place to another place. They have to drama for each member of family or each member. Again, the traveling cost, the what we can say the tickets. When we consider all these restraints, novel gave more freedom to the novel. Novel gives more freedom to the spectators. If we buy a single piece of novel, then many people can read it at a single cost. But that was not the case of drama. And that's why novel slowly took the position of drama, and later on, novel became one of the celebrated forms of literature. The last one we can consider, the freedom of the novel from the classical restraints. Now for drama and poetry, there were many classical examples. And if you want to write a successful or well celebrated drama or poetry, you have to follow that classical examples. Otherwise, you will be away from the classical. But in terms of novel, it was not the case. Novel was the new literary form, and whatever was the write-up of novel, that was the example for the successors. So this is what we can consider when we compare novel with other literary forms, those who were already existed on the form of on the scene of literature, on the canvas of literature, poetry and drama. Novel was much more suitable, convenient, comfortable for both writer and reader, and that's why in the beginning of 18th century, all these things happened in the first or second decade of the 18th century, and simultaneously that slowly gave push up to the emergence of novel as a literary genre on the canvas of literature. Here we will discuss some definitions of novel so that we can easily understand to what we can consider novel and to what we should not consider. See, the first definition of novel is what? A fictitious prose narrative of considerable length and complexity, portraying characters and visually presenting a sequential organization of action and scenes is called a novel. Now, see, here are some words are important that must be analyzed, that must be interpreted. Now, see, novel is a fictitious prose. It is not entirely reality. It is in prose form. Take into consideration the earlier form of literature, novel, poetry or drama. Both were in verse form, but novel is in prose form, and that was the reason that many people attempted to write a novel. It is a narration of particular incidences, events, and it must have a considerable length. It must be in considerable length. Though there is not a exact or perfect number of pages that we can consider a novel, but if it is too short, then it is considered as a short story or short fiction. If it crosses the limit of short fiction or short stories, then it reaches to consider as a novel. And when it goes beyond novella, then it is considered as a novel. It has a complexity. It has a complexity. The plot of the novel must have some complexities. Then only there is a good scope for the writer to go at certain details, and it portrays characters. There is no novel without character. There must be at least human or some inanimate things that must play the role of characters, and it usually presenting the sequential organization of action. In novel, we must have action, but there must be some links. It must be not a linear one. There must be some flashback techniques, but it must be woven in a way that that action must have some connections, and there is a scene, and this is what we can consider a novel. Second, novel, again there are some underlined words. A novel is a long narrative, normally in prose, which describes fictional characters, that must describe fictional characters and events, usually in the form of sequential story. Again, now see the underlined word which are important: prose and fictional. Any write-up that must be in prose form and that must have some fictional characters, then only it is considered as a what we can say, a novel. Third is what, again underlined word is what, prose fiction. So the point is what, we must have prose fiction, and that is what we can say a novelist. Got the point? So these three definitions somehow underlines the words, or somehow underlines the basic criteria that is called a novel. It must be in prose form. It must have some fictional characters. It must have a considerable length. It must be not too short. It must be not too lengthy, but it must have a considerable length where we can have a completion of plot. Got it? So these are the definitions of novels. Now see the aspects of novels. The novel must have, the novel has many aspects. The first important is what, plot. The second one is what, theme. Just a minute. Okay, the most important aspect is what, plot, then theme as the second aspect of a novel. The third one is what we can say, characters. The fourth one is setting, point of view, and narration. Now see, these are the important aspects of novels. When we read a novel, to get a better understanding, we must analyze these aspects of novels so we can have better understanding of any novel. The first one is what, plot. What is plot? Plot means a plan, or we can consider it as a scheme, design, or pattern of events in a literary work. any literary work that must have some actions, isn't it? There are some events, but these events or these actions must have certain plans. Apart, if there is no plan or scheme, then there is no concrete plot in a novel or in any literary work. Again, in poetics, Aristotle considered plot as one of the most important six elements of tragedy. For him, the plot is the first principle and the soul of tragedy. So it underlines the importance of the plot. Though he focuses on tragedy and consider plot as the first principle or the soul of a tragedy, the same we can apply. The plot is the first principle and the soul of any novel. The success of novel, or the what we can say, the celebration of novel depends on how the plot is constructed. If plot is constructed in a systematic way, the novel is what appreciated by readers. So there must be a plot in a systematic way, which is what developed in a systematic way. Now, in his book Aspects of the Novel, E.M. Foster described a much simpler and suitable approach of the plot. In his view, plot is a narrative of events, but the emphasis must have on falling on causality. So, though there is a linear pattern of plot, but there must be cause and effect. Cause and effect should be there in the plot. Then only there is a interest for a reader to read it. If there is a linear action, then reader may not have interest reading that type of plot. So when there is a plot, there must be some focused on falling of causality, cause and effect. Now this is what the diagram, or we can say pyramid of Freytag, who describe plot. There are 5 elements. Sorry, there are 6 elements. I'm sorry, there are 5 elements in the Freytag's pyramid. The first one is what exposition, and then in his view, there must be some rising action. The rising action must reach to the climax, and then there should be falling actions and denouement. Now, see, in the exposition, what he expects in a novel, in the exposition part of a plot, there must be entry of all the important characters, and reader must get an idea what could be the novel is all about. That must happen in exposition. As we observed in a movie, in the first 10 or 15 minutes, there are entries of all important characters, protagonist, antagonist, or other characters. And in the first 10 or 15 minutes, audience can get a brief idea what could be the movie is all about. So that is what that must happen in the exposition zone of the pyramid. Then must start the rising action. In the rising action, there must be some complexity in the among the characters. There must be development of loveship. There must be development of enmity. Whatever the novel have its focused. But rising action should go to the highest point where we can consider as a climax. In cinema or in movie, we have interval there. So climax could be the highest point of complexity of action, rising action. After that, there must be no new complexity. There must be no what we can say different issue emerged in the novel. So climax is the highest emergence of issues, or it could be enmity, it could be loveship, it could be marriage, it could be religion, it could be family issue, anything. But after climax, there is no permission to introduce new complexity. And after climax, all whatever the complexity happens in the rising actions, all that leads towards the end part, or we can say the solve, or the answers of mysteries, the answers of all problems that the solutions of all problems that happen during the rising actions. And the last one is what denouement. It could be the happy ending, it could be the sad ending, but again there is no solution and there is no problem in the zone of denouement. There is what just a formality of ending. So this is what Freytag's pyramid of plot: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement. Then comes character. As I mentioned earlier, there is no novel without characters. There must be at least one or two characters. It could be animate, it could be inanimate. Characters are the persons presented in dramatic or narrative works and analyzed by the readers. There must be persons, they must have some dialogues, they must have some action, they must have some issues, and then through these opportunities, the writer, the novelist can develop his novel. Again, example of E.M. Forster in his Aspects of Novel that released published in 1927, he divided the characters into two groups. In his view, there are two types of characters. The first one is flat characters, and second one is what? Round character. Flat character is what? Flat character who is developed around two dimensions, or it is the characters which has certain principles, which has some philosophy of his own life, and that never get changed at any cost from the first page of the novel or till the last page of novel. There are no changes, or there is not even a single change in the behavior, in the thought process, in the ideology of that character. If there is no change in the behavior of character, then it is considered as a flat character. Take example of any movie where we have character who never compromise with his own principles, who never compromise with his ideology, who never compromise whether it could be good for himself or it could be bad for himself, but he never changes his words, and that is called a flat character. In short, a character that never changes throughout the novel is called a flat character. Now, against a flat character, there is a round character. Round character gets changed in the due course of novel. Suppose a character who is very honest at first, but later on he joined politics and started corruption, who is no more honest, then it is a flat character because the character changed from honest to corrupted. So that is called a round character. Character who changes according to the situations. Character who changes according to the persons, and that is called a round character. The third important elements or aspects of a novel is a theme. The theme is the central idea of a literary work. The main focus, what is, obviously there are minor themes also. Generally, major and minor are the two types of themes. Though the writer focused on one major theme that occur constantly, or within the 10 or 15 minutes, or within 10 or 15 pages, we can understand the focus of the novel. But there are some minor themes that happens at certain periods. A major theme is the idea that a writer repeats constantly in his work. It is also called a motif. The writer makes the theme the most significant idea of his literary work. On the other hand, a minor theme refers to an idea that appears in a work briefly. Though minor theme does not consider many pages of the novel, but it has its own existence, and that's why it is considered as a minor. The many pages of novel related to or includes the details that are related to major themes, and minor themes happens at certain times. It is not like a motive that happens constantly. Suppose if there is a tragic movie, even though that is a tragic movie, there are some elements that creates humor, and that certain elements are considered as a minor. If a movie has central idea, love as the central idea, but apart from love, if there are some details, these details are considered as a minor. The most important element of a novel is the setting. Setting tells us where the story happens. Setting tells us where the story happens. Setting tells us how the story happens. Setting tells us how the story happens. Apart from that, setting also gives information about the society, about the time, and many more things. Now, several elements that make the setting of a novel. But we consider three major important elements that go to make a setting of any novel. or any literary work, not only in terms of novel, the first element is what? Time. Second is place, and third one is social environment. These three elements make setting. The time in which a story takes place has a major effect on the plot. Time gives a sense of the customs, cultures, and other related details of the period in which action takes place. Now see the importance of time in terms of setting. Time gives us the idea. Suppose the novel set in the 16th century, then it gives the details that we easily understand. The time of the novel is what? 16th century. The action of the novel happened in the 16th century. So the time gives us the details of the 16th century's custom, 16th century's culture, and many details which are from 16th century. Look at the characters. Look at his language. Look at his selection of words. That must be from the 16th century. So this is what the importance of time. Take example of historical movie. For example, a very recent released historical movie, Tanaji. Now, when we watch Tanaji, then it gives the sense that movie is from 17th century. So look at the customs, the marriage ceremony of Tanaji's son. Look at the cultures. It all from 17th century. So this is what the importance of time. Next is what? Place. Place largely affects the story overall. It also helps the reader to get some ideas about the location. If a novel describes intercaste marriage, then place has its own effects on that particular scene. Intercaste marriage in European context is different. The same of intercaste marriage in India. Got it? So though the action is same, but in terms of place, it has different importance. Intercaste marriage in India or intercaste marriage in middle class or lower class is not easily accepted one. But the intercaste marriage at upper class can be easily accepted. Now see, the action is same, but the place varies, and that's why it important varies. The third one is what? Social environment. It helps us to get the idea of political and cultural condition of this story. Any event that happen in a democratic state would be the different at the dictatorship state. Now see the scenario of Afghanistan. The event happened in the scenario of Afghanistan would be the complete have difference at India or in India. So that is what social environment. Fifth important aspects of novel is what? Point of view and narration. It tells us the position and outlook of the narrator. Who is telling the story? How is telling the story? That is what. Where you determine who is telling the story, you have discovered the narrative point of view. The point of view comes in three varieties: first person narration, second person narration, and third person narration. When there is a use of pronoun like I, it is the first person narration. If there is a pronoun like you, use of pronoun like you, then that is we consider as a second person narration. And if all characters speaks about themselves, then it is considered as the third person narration. Now see the first person, it must have the use of I, me, my, mine in his or her speech. If I tell a story of myself, then it is a first person narration. Autobiographical write-up is always in first person narration because the writer speaks about himself or herself, and that is why it is a first person narration. The second person, as I mentioned, it comes with you and yours. Instead of speaking myself, I'll speak about some other persons, and that is what second person narration. And in the third person narration, it is omniscient or omnipresent narrator. The writer opens all the characters to speak out their own experience, all the characters, and that is called third person narration. It is what the position where we stand and look at the condition, look at the events and how we describe. That is called point of view and narration. So after discussing the emergence of novel as a literary genre, we discuss definitions of novel, we discuss aspects of novels. I hope everything is going on well. Here I will move to the types of novels. The first type of novel, again keep in mind, these types are according to the journey of novel genre. The first type that novel came up with, the picaresque novel. Then we have epistolary novel, then historical novel, social novel, industrial novel, psychological novel, campus novel. These are the major 6 types of novels that started from the 18th century. Picaresque novel, 18th century. Campus novel, 20th century. So I tried my best to consider the all course of novel from its beginning to the most recent type of novel. So here we can indirectly go through the journey of novel. I will discuss all these 6 types of novels in brief, one by one. Now, picaresque novel. The word picaro is not English origin. It is a Spanish origin and it came from the word picaro. Now, what is picaro? Picaro is like in Spanish, rascal or roadside character. The narration of picaresque novel is always autobiographical or mostly autobiographical. The hero, the protagonist, speaks about himself or herself, and that's why we consider picaresque novel is in autobiographical form. Protagonist is often from lower social class. Now see, uh, link it with the emergence of novel. As I mentioned, earlier literature before novel, literature before 18th century focused on the upper class, but the novel took care to focus on the lower class, middle class, common man, and that's why the hero of picaresque novel is from lower social middle class or lower class or middle class. If I mentioned the protagonist of picaresque novel is from upper class, then again literature represented only upper class. And that's why systematically novel focused on the middle class, lower class, and that's why the heroes, the characters, setting, language, all that must be from lower class or middle class. Got it? So the protagonist of the first type of novel, picaresque novel, that was the part of, we can say, the first 2 decades of the 18th century. And the protagonist of the picaresque novel was from lower social class. The character or the protagonist starts his journey from one place to another place. That is what the geographical journey, from one geographical location to another geographical location. For example, from Mumbai to Delhi. That is what the geographical journey, moving from one place to another place. But apart from that, picaresque novel also focus on the journey of character's life from one state to another state. Just a minute. Okay, sorry for the disturbance. The picaresque novelist focused on the life or the states of life of the protagonist, and it has
Hello, sir. Deore, sir. Hello. आप क्या करो, आप उतना ही बोल दो अभी, आपका वीडियो ऑन करो.
कहाँ पे? यहाँ पे स्टार्ट वीडियो क्या? स्टार्ट है. हेलो सर. हेलो सर, नमस्कार. Thank you so much, sir, for your nice presentation on the study of novel. I am Professor Vasave. Express gratitude to you, sir. You have gave valuable time for our student. I thank you once again on behalf of Department of English, J.K. Adarsh College. So thank you, sir, very much. Thank you.